The storm came in faster than I expected. One moment, the sky was clear, and the next, heavy clouds rolled in, darkening the world around me. I was about 10 miles from the nearest town, the only car on a narrow, winding road that cut through dense woods on either side. As the first raindrops began to fall, I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, suddenly very aware of how isolated I really was. Within minutes, the rain became a huge downpour. My wipers were going full speed, but it was barely enough to keep up. The road started to blur, and I could hardly see beyond the faint glow of my headlights. I slowed down, hoping to find a safe spot to pull over until the storm passed. Then, through the pounding rain, I noticed a figure up ahead. A man, standing in the middle of the road, drenched, waving his arms. I almost didn't see him in time, slamming on the brakes and skidding to a stop just a few feet away from him. My heart pounded as I watched him through the windshield, trying to make sense of it. Who would be out here in a storm like this? I rolled down my window slightly. "Hey, are you alright?" He didn't answer, just looked at me with an odd expression, a mixture of fear and relief. He pointed down the road, his mouth moving as if he was shouting, but I couldn't make out the words over the rain. I gestured for him to come closer so I could hear him. He leaned in, rain streaming down his face, his eyes wide and desperate. "Please," he shouted towards me. "I need to get out of here. Can you take me to town?" He looked harmless, just a man caught in a terrible storm, and I couldn't just leave him out here. So I unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in, dripping water onto my seat, and as he settled in, I noticed his hands were trembling. He looked at me with a strange intensity. "Thank you. You shouldn't be out here. Yeah, this storm is insane. What are you doing out here?" I asked him, pulling back onto the road, struggling to keep my focus with the relentless rain hammering down on the roof. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out the window as if watching for something. After a long silence, he said, "I was walking. I didn't think anyone would stop." I kept my eyes on the road, but a chill was creeping up my spine. Something about him seemed off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Well, you're lucky I came by. No one else would be out here in weather like this." He looked over toward me, his face pale in the dim light. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. "Hear what?" "The voice. It calls to you. It makes you walk. You don't even realize where you're going until..." His voice trailed off, and he shivered, wrapping his arms around himself as if he could ward off something cold and terrible. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. I tightened my grip on the wheel, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you talking about, dude?" He stared straight ahead, his expression haunted. "I heard it in the rain. It sounded like my wife's voice. She's been gone for years, but it was her. She was calling for me, telling me she needed help. So I went into the woods, looking for her, but I wasn't the only one. There were others, lost, following voices that led them deeper, further from the road." I felt my pulse quicken. I wanted to tell him it was all in his head, that he must have been imagining things. But as I opened my mouth, a sound broke through the rain. A faint, far-off voice drifting in from the darkness outside. I froze, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. It was so faint I thought it might have been just the wind, but there was a rhythm to it. A call, gentle and insistent, like someone murmuring just beyond the edge of hearing. "Do you hear it?" he whispered toward me. I shook my head, trying to ignore it, trying to focus on the road. "It's just the wind," I said, forcing my voice to sound calm. But deep down, I could feel it, a magnetic pull, a strange compulsion to turn off the road, to follow that voice into the trees. The man reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip cold and desperate. "Don't listen to it. That's how it starts. Just keep driving. Don't let it get to you." I pressed down my foot on the gas, trying to put as much distance as I could between us and whatever was out there. But the voice grew louder, clearer. I could almost make out words now, beckoning, pleading. And the terrible thing was, it sounded familiar, like someone I knew, someone I loved. The man beside me began to shake, muttering under his breath. "It's her. She's back. She's out there." His eyes glazed over, and before I could stop him, he flung open the door and stumbled out into the storm. "Wait, what are you doing?" I shouted, but he was already gone, vanishing into the rain-drenched darkness. I could see his silhouette, wandering back toward the woods, his form disappearing with each flash of lightning. I slammed the door shut and locked it, gripping the wheel, fighting the urge to follow him. The voice was still there, calling softly, a warm, familiar tone promising comfort, safety, home. I felt my hand start to reach for the door handle. With every ounce of willpower I had, I forced myself to keep driving, eyes fixed on the road. The voice faded as I sped away, leaving only the sound of the rain and the distant roll of thunder. I've been driving through the back roads to save time, eager to get home before the worst of the storm hit. But soon enough, the clouds rolled in, heavy and dark, and the rain started pounding against my windshield, thick and relentless. The wipers barely made a dent, and the narrow country road had started to flood. Still, I pushed forward. I could feel the anxiety creeping up on me, but I kept telling myself I just had to make it a few more miles. Suddenly, I spotted a red glow in the distance. It looked like a pair of hazard lights blinking through the rain, faint but unmistakable. As I got closer, I saw it was an old blue sedan, partially submerged in a ditch at the side of the road. Water was up to the door handles. Whoever was inside had to be trapped. I pulled over, grabbing my rain jacket, and jumped out, dashing through the downpour. "Hey, are you alright?" I shouted, but the wind whipped my voice away. I peered into the car. A woman was sitting inside, hunched over, her hair hanging in her face, soaking wet. Her hand was resting against the fogged-up window, unmoving. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I knocked on the window, but she didn't respond. I grabbed the handle, expecting it to be locked, but the door creaked open, and a flood of murky water rushed out. The woman sat still as stone, head tilted down, her shoulders slightly slumped. Her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her, and her skin looked pale, almost bluish. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I shook it off and reached out. "Miss, are you hurt?" Slowly, she lifted her head, and I caught a glimpse of her eyes, dark and sunken, with the expression of absolute terror frozen in them. Her lips parted, and she whispered, barely audible over the storm, "Get out." I stumbled back, my heart hammering. For a second, I thought I was imagining this. the stress and the storm playing tricks on my mind. But then I saw her hand jerk, as if she was trying to push me away. I backed up further, my breath catching as I felt an almost magnetic pull toward the car, an overwhelming sense that I shouldn't be here, shouldn't look any closer. Just then, a flash of lightning lit up the sky, illuminating something else in the car. A second figure, slumped in the back seat, half hidden in shadow. My stomach dropped. There was no way two people could have been in this car without me noticing before. But there he was, his head resting against the window, his skin gray and bloated. The smell hit me, putrid and overpowering. I stumbled backward, my foot slipping in the mud, and I fell, splashing into the water pooled by the side of the road. As I scrambled to my feet, the woman's face turned toward me, her mouth moving soundlessly now, but her expression was pleading, desperate. Lightning flashed again, and in that moment, I noticed something else. There was a handprint on the inside of the windshield, smudged and muddy, like someone had been trying to claw their way out. And in that instant, a horrible realization hit me. They weren't trapped by the storm. They were trapped in something far worse. I took another step back, the rain blurring my vision, and I turned to run back towards my car. But as I glanced over my shoulder one last time, the headlights of the blue sedan flicked on. Both figures were staring at me now, their eyes hollow, their mouths slightly open in an unnatural, silent scream. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, slipping and splashing through the mud, back to my car, yanking the door open and fumbling to start the engine. My heart raced as I pulled back onto the flooded road, not daring to look in my rearview mirrors, just focusing on putting as much distance as possible between me and that horrible scene. But as I drove, I could still feel it, the oppressive weight of their eyes upon me, the echo of their silent screams ringing in my ears. Every flash of lightning seemed to illuminate their faces again, etched in my memory, burned into my mind. And the worst part? As I finally reached the main road and the rain started to let up, I did in fact glance in my rearview mirror, and there, just faintly, was a muddy handprint on my own window. The storm came out of nowhere. I'd been driving along a deserted country road on my way back from a weekend camping trip, peaceful woods stretching around me, when the first raindrops tapped on my windshield. Then, almost instantly, the sky unleashed a violent downpour. The road vanished underneath the rain, and the forest loomed menacingly on either side of me, drenched in shadow and mist. I slowed to a crawl, peering out as lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the twisted trees around me. The rumble of thunder rolled through the forest, vibrating the car. I told myself it was just a storm, I'd be fine. But something about the trees, the darkness, felt wrong, like the forest was alive, watching me. Then I saw it. A figure standing on the side of the road, barely visible in my headlights. I swerved, heart racing, and realized I'd skidded onto the shoulder. I had to stop. My hand shook as I turned on my hazard lights and reached for my phone to call for help, but I had no signal. I looked up. The figure was still there, a woman, drenched by the rain, standing motionless at the edge of the trees. Her hair clung to her face, her clothes soaked through, and she stared at me. I tried to ignore the cold chill creeping up my spine. I honked my horn, trying to signal that I couldn't help, hoping she'd get the hint. But she didn't move. She didn't react at all. My headlights flickered, and my car stalled. I fumbled with the ignition, panicked, but the engine wouldn't start. In the brief silence between thunderclaps, I heard something else. The soft, raspy sound of her breathing, muffled by the storm, but close, too close. She was right outside my window. A flash of lightning split the sky, and I looked over instinctively. Her face was pressed against the glass, pale and hollow. Her eyes were dark, like pools of ink, but they glistened with some unspeakable hunger. I froze, staring into those eyes, and felt a wave of dread wash over me. My fingers dug into the wheel. "Go away," I whispered, hoping she'd somehow hear me through the closed windows. Her lips twitched, stretching into an eerie, twisted smile. I forced myself to turn away, glancing back at the ignition, praying for the engine to turn over. The thunder crashed louder, shaking the car, and then I heard it. A slow tap on my window, like bony fingers knocking. I kept trying the ignition, but it only clicked, refusing to start. Another lightning flash, and she was gone. I couldn't see her anywhere. I scanned the trees and the road, but she'd vanished. I felt a small surge of relief, even as the fear lingered. Then came the pounding. A fist against the glass, then the door handle rattled like she was trying to get inside of my car. I gripped the door as if my hand alone could keep her out. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, even though I knew she couldn't hear me. The rain poured harder, making it almost impossible to see outside, and the storm raged around me, lightning flashing in rapid bursts, illuminating the woods. Each flash showed a figure moving closer to the car, another shape, another face, all ghostly pale and soaked, all staring right at me. A whole crowd of them now, just beyond the reach of the headlights, waiting. I tried the ignition again, and this time it roared to life. I didn't hesitate. I hit the gas, pulling back onto the road, racing forward, tires slipping on the wet pavement. As I drove, I looked in my rearview mirror. The woman and her silent crowd of friends stood in the road, watching me, their faces flickering in and out with each lightning strike. I didn't stop. I kept driving until the storm faded and the trees cleared, and the dark stretch of road was far, far behind me. But every time a storm rolls in now, every time lightning cracks the sky, I feel their eyes on me again, waiting.